Welcome back, Algebra 1. We are here to do GCF with the X method day 2. So we, again, will first factor out a GCF, then continue factoring with the X method. But today when we factor with the X method, we will need to use different signs. Same steps as yesterday. First factor out the GCF. This must be done. And then we'll factor using the X method. Remember, our final answers for this will be GCF and then 2 sets of parentheses. That's what our final answer would look like. Okay, so let's give these a try. We again are going to have 6 examples total today. All right, looking at this first polynomial, we should be first looking for a GCF. Hopefully you can see that each of these numbers are divisible by 7. However, not every term has an x. The 21 does not have an x, so we can only divide them all by 7. That's our GCF. The GCF also goes outside our parentheses, just like we've always done. And the leftovers will go inside. So our leftovers would be x squared minus 2x minus 3. We are then trying to factor with the X method what is inside of those parentheses. So I'm trying to multiply to -3, but add up to -2. Multiply to -3, add to -2. So when we try to multiply to a negative number, we need to have different signs. So we either need it to be -1 with a +3, or we need it to be +1 with a -3. Of course, since our 2 that we're trying to add up to is a negative, we need our bigger factor to be negative, which means we need to use 1 and -3. Okay, if you've got questions about how we landed on those numbers, let me know. So when we go to write our final answer, we need our GCF still out front with 2 sets of parentheses. In those parentheses, we would have x plus 1 and x minus 3, because that 3 that we used was a negative. And that would be our final answer. Okay, so let's try that again on number 2. We first need our GCF. I'm hoping we can all see that these can all be divided by 2x this time. They all have at least 1 x that they could give up. And they are all divisible by 2. So our GCF goes outside some parentheses. What's left is x squared plus 4x minus 32. Our GCF will stay outside our parentheses, but this time we're going to factor using the X method, what we have left. So this time we are trying to multiply to -32 and add up to +4. Again, if you need to multiply to a negative number, you need to have different signs. If you're trying to add up to a positive number, your larger factor needs to be positive. So if we look at our factor pairs, we would make our smaller factor the -1 so that our bigger factor would be the +1. -4 and 8. I think that's all of them. Okay, so then when we look at this, hopefully you see that this last factor pair is going to end up adding up to a positive 4. So we would use negative 4 and positive 8. So x minus 4 and x plus 8 fills in the rest of our answer. I mentioned this last week, but I'll mention it again. If you flip-flop these factors, technically that's fine, as long as you keep the correct sign with the correct number. Meaning if I go back to number 1, because I've got more space to write there, we would still need the 7 outside no matter what. But you could put x minus 3 and then x plus 1 and still have the correct answer. Okay, so it doesn't matter which order you put your sets of parentheses. It does matter which numbers are positive or negative. All right, let's try a couple more. What do you think your GCF is on number 3? Hopefully you're telling me 3x. Those can all get divided by 3, and they all have an x to contribute. 3x goes outside some parentheses. The leftovers go inside. My leftovers are x squared minus 3x minus 18. What we have left, we're going to factor with the x method. So our x, we're trying to multiply to negative 18 and add up to negative 3. So this time we need our bigger factor to be negative because we're trying to add to a negative. So our bigger factor needs to be negative 2 and negative 9, 3 and negative 6. Okay, our bigger factor is negative. The pair that's going to add up to negative 3 is going to be 3 and negative 6. So when I go to write my final answer, those magic numbers help me fill in those parentheses. X plus 3 and x minus 6. All right, next up, what is our GCF on number 4? Hopefully you're telling me the only thing that all of those have in common is an x. Okay, there's no number that they all have in common. You could put a 1 out in front of the x cubed. The only number they could all be divided by is 1. We don't usually write that. So our GCF is just x. When we factor that out, we're left with x squared plus 11x minus 12. We need to factor what's left using the x method. We're trying to multiply to a negative 12 and add up to a positive 11. If we're trying to add to a positive number, then we need our bigger factor to be positive. So negative 1 times 12, negative 2 times 6, negative 3 times 4. Okay. Hopefully you can see that the one that adds up to positive 11 is the first one. Negative 1 and 12. So our GCF still stays outside our parentheses. Inside, we're going to use our magic numbers. So x minus 1 and x plus 12. Okay, if you've got questions or concerns about this process, you should be writing them down. On this next slide, I will give you a couple minutes to do these, so go ahead and pause the video to try these on your own, and I'll have the solutions up when we resume the video. All right, so we've got the solutions up for these two problems. If you need to, you can pause it to look at these a little bit longer. Compare your answers. The GCF for number 5 was x squared, so I kept that outside my parentheses the whole time. My leftovers gave me my x method to multiply to -10, add up to -3. Remember, when you have to use different signs, your bigger factor should have the same sign as your middle term or whatever you're trying to add up to. So my bigger number was 5, and it was the -1. 2 plus -5 adds up to -3. On number 6, the only thing we could factor from every term was 8. So that GCF stayed outside my parentheses the whole time. What was left over, I factored with my x method again. And again, because my middle term was positive, or I'm trying to add up to a positive, I knew that my bigger factor had to be positive. So -5 and +8. That's it for our examples for today. Please make sure that you're emailing me with any questions about any of the problems in the notes or any of the problems in your homework.